put the place up.
Welcome to Your Next Chapter, where we feature conversations with leading audio creators and industry experts shaping the future of podcasting. I'm Jeremiah Tittle, CEO of Next Chapter Podcasts, and your host for insightful conversations that delve into the creative processes, challenges, and innovations driving the world of audio storytelling. Our guest for this episode, I'm very excited to speak with one of our newest Next Chapter podcast team members, Alex Schaffert. Alex has spent her career shaping the podcast divisions for some of the most recognizable names in public media, such as American Public Media and KPCC, LAist in Los Angeles. Alex, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here. Great to be here.
Wonderful to have you. And, we talk all the time because you're
Yes,
part of the
indeed.
Next Chapter family here. So it's a different context. And for those listening, I often, either behind your back, sometimes in front of your face, refer to you as our head of psychology.
I love it. Okay.
Because didn't you study psychology in school? Is that right?
I did. That was one of the misguided things I did in my youth. But no, I did. I was really interested in cognitive science and the brain, and I studied cognitive psychology. And I did not get a PhD, but I got out with a master's.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, I love human psychology. You know, humans are deeply flawed, and I love them. And it's just, I love, learning from human behavior. I sound like an academic. Maybe deep down, I'm still an academic.
Well, that's okay. I mean, I find it helps often. I don't know, in the world of media, like what is actually going on behind the scenes or behind these actions. So I don't know. I find it very valuable to be able to refer to you. Not that we have too many issues, Michael Goodfriend and I, in terms of we get along pretty well, I think, here. But it's I'm always curious.
Yes, I will corroborate that, even though I'm on your payroll. But yes,
Yeah.
I will corroborate that you get along well, and that's why I enjoy working with you guys.
Oh, well, we love having you on the team. And I'm so glad that the creator of the 10 News, who we've been working with, Tracy Kaplan, for now we're in our 5th season of the 10 News. But I'm so glad that she introduced us at Podcast Movement Evolutions in LA last March. So to our benefit that
Yes.
we're able to bring you on board the Next Chapter team. And I'd love to maybe have you explain maybe what you do for Next Chapter, but why don't we start at the beginning? So when did you fall in love with audio? Because you've told me the story a couple of times, but I'd love for you to tell the listening audience.
So as you can tell from my accent, I'm not from the Mississippi Delta. I was born in Germany. I grew up in Germany. And, I grew up during a time back in the day, in the late 70s and 80s, when, there was, of course, kids' TV in Germany. And I don't care how old I sound. I'll just tell you, I literally grew up during a time before cable TV, and there was only a limited number of, children's TV on, like at 4:00 in the afternoon. And but all the German kids, everybody was listening to cassette tapes. And I would even say not just little kids, but into early teens. And so, we all had a stack of cassette tapes, and while we were doing homework or even, being on play dates, these cassette tapes were, they were the violent German fairy tales that everybody loves and cherishes.
Yes, I've heard about these.
Right, you know them all. But they were also modern serialized fiction storytelling. The most famous series is called Die drei Fragezeichen, literally translated as the 3 question marks, but the actual English title is The 3 Investigators, and they were also successful in the UK. I don't think they made it really. They're not well known in the United States, but it was about three boys, because back in the day it was always three boys as opposed to three girls. It was three boys, and they were, young, yeah, they were teenagers, and they were investigating cases. And this was a hugely successful mystery series. And there were, dozens of episodes. Um, and maybe later, I'm telling you the story because I hope that some audiophiles are, listen to this podcast. And so there's a whole generation of audiophiles that was born. I'm Gen X, so there's a lot of Gen Xers in Germany that to this day love, really, really high quality audio. And that's also why Germany is a big market. I don't know if it's the second biggest market, but it's definitely among the top 5 markets. Spotify has a huge presence in Germany, and this is all rooted in an audio culture. And just to put some proof to my little story, I have a little book called Das Erbe der Kassettenkinder, the legacy of the cassette children. And so it's actually
Wow.
a little book that looks at this, moment in pop culture where kids literally had, 20 cassette tapes on the shelf, and you would trade cassette tapes if you had an episode and your friend had an episode. So this was really the birth of audio culture, and that's why, when in Germany, oftentimes there are some really well-known, really successful audio adaptations. For example, The Never-Ending Story, another great work of the German culture, right?
Love it.
In the early 80s. There is an audio adaptation of The Never-Ending Story, but it's not just some, narrator reading the actual book by Michael Ende. It's actually a fully cinematically produced audio production. And so, yeah. I will also say a little bit about, both in the UK and in Germany, because we have such solid public broadcasting systems. I would say the audio drama never went away because, there was always some, maybe not the main public radio channel, but like the channel 3 or channel 4 on public radio in Germany or in the UK. They would publish and produce and make audio dramas, as in fully produced stories, not just somebody reading a book, but fully produced, immersive, fictionalized storytelling. And even though, the popularity of these sort of grew and waned over the years, the audio culture just never went away. And so that's where my love of audio started.
I love it. Yeah, I love getting more detail too to fill out some of the blanks for me. And candidly, my partner being from Germany, I've been exposed to some of the stories that she's told about what is it, the Brothers Grimm, and just
Hmm.
various different nightmarish stories that are passed along for a Crimbus. Wait, what is it?
Krampus.
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 Oh my
You're,
goodness.
you're you're mixing a couple of our greatest themes, but yeah, there's a book called Struwwelpeter, and
Mhm.
that was just a book about a little naughty boy who wouldn't eat his soup, or stories about children who wouldn't eat their soup, who wouldn't cut their nails. Max and Moritz, same, like two little boys that got up to no good, and let's just say what happened to them was not pretty. I will not go into the details in case there are children listening to this podcast, but yes, that's yeah. So that there is this streak, and then Krampus, of course, is like the evil brother to Santa Claus. And whenever I told my work colleagues about what Krampus did with little naughty children, they couldn't believe it. It fits right into the German stereotype. Suffice it to say. The last thing that I wanted to tell you before I forget, just so you know the depths of how the love of audio goes, the audio performers who were teenagers when they taped these three investigator stories, that became the basis of those cassette tapes that were popular in the 80s, when those audio performers were fully grown up 20 years later, they would do live performances of these stories, as 40-year-old men, on big stages in Berlin and elsewhere. And all the Gen Xers like me would come out with their children, and sort of keep the lore of the three question marks of the three investigators alive. So this is how deep the love goes.
Oh, I love it. So you're the perfect person to be, out there with me as we're talking to folks about, uh, their hopeful love of podcasts and audio and this kind of rebirth of audio storytelling that we've been a part of. I do want to get to like the beginning of your career and how you ended up here with us, but I also wanted to bring up the term or the song, "Video Killed the Radio Star,"
Mm-hmm.
because we recently had lead singer of Skid Row, Sebastian Bach, talking about MTV and how influential it was in transitioning from hair metal and the hard rock of like the late 70s or through the 80s, I guess, into grunge in the 90s. And that was really dictated, according to Sebastian on the 500. He was a guest with Josh and I, talking about MTV's control over what MTV being this powerful medium. And now here we are again in podcasting where, I mean, we're recording video right now. Video is becoming so important to the podcasting world, but I guess there's still a place in your heart and my heart for audio's sake, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. And, I think that, the appeal of audio is just, you can listen to audio while you're doing something else. And, I have now a longer commute twice a week to the west side of Los Angeles. I live in LA, as you know. And but I listen to all these great podcasts, and it really makes the time fly by. And so yeah, I think there is a special role for audio, but at the end of the day, it is a continuum. And many talk shows, like interview based shows like this one, um, obviously you're recording video. There might people who find this show on YouTube, and maybe they start watching for 3 minutes and then they put the phone down, but they leave their headphones in and they continue to listen to the conversation. So I think people can just choose, whether they want the visuals, whether they need the visuals, or whether they're just listening to audio. And as you know, research shows that even though YouTube is this exploding platform for podcasts right now, we know that many people treat YouTube as an audio player or as a podcast player. And, it aids in the search because you're searching for something, you see some faces, maybe you see the YouTube thumbnail. So there is a visual search component. But then once you found the content that you're looking for, in other words, I think discoverability is better on YouTube. Once you found the content that you're looking for, you may choose to continue just to listen on audio.
Good points. Okay, let's get to you.
Mhm.
So you're based in LA. I don't want to tell your story, but doing graphic design, how did you get into radio?
Yeah, I got into radio. I worked for Universal Studios, and I was working on fine cinematic series like the Fast and Furious series. And,
Yes.
what else did we work on? Well, at the time, we worked on a reissue of E.T. and Big Fat Liar, and the Universal oeuvre. And so as I was, working on these movies, and yes, I was working in graphic design. At the time, I was designing, we were building these really intricate websites for these films, and I was working on the websites. But while I was doing that work, very detail oriented work, making sure that all the pixels are correct, I was always listening to public radio. And I had, of course, discovered KCOW, the flagship LA station. But then I also figured out that there was another station at the time, KPCC, Talk News. And I was listening to it constantly. So I was always on the website, always streaming. And then it turned out that on the website, they had a job posting for a web producer, which was the first digital position. And I got the job, and this was in 2005, and then I had a full career at KPCC building the first website. The website when I started had 3 pages: a streaming button, a donate button, and a homepage. And
Wow.
so, and this was KPCC, and compare it to today. Now, of course, the brand is LAist, which I helped purchase that brand and helped with the rebranding effort. But now LAist is a real nonprofit news force in Los Angeles, with a sizable local newsroom that covers what's going on. If you open Apple News on your phone here in LA, it feeds me both national stories, but it also feeds me LAist stories. But all of that began, somewhere, and I was at that beginning, and it was fun and rewarding. I really built with my colleagues, of course, but I built that web presence from scratch. So I'm incredibly proud of, being part of that first wave of digital hitting public radio.
That's cool. What was LAist before? Because I lived in LA for a few years, I guess a decade after you started, but it was just a magazine. Am I wrong about that? A newspaper?
Yeah, it was a magazine, and ultimately, there was LAist, there was Gothamist, there was SFist, there was Chicagoist, there was DCist. So there were a bunch of these local news websites. I don't want to get it wrong. So, the people who Google this, please correct me in the comments. But all of these news websites were ultimately owned by a very wealthy person. I think his name was Joe Ricketts. And as it turned out, at some point, I want to say 2017, 18, the people who worked on these news websites had the idea to unionize. And Joe didn't like that. So Joe shut down all of these sites. And then he was selling them not as functioning businesses, but as assets. And
Hmm.
WNYC, New York, the New York Public Radio, they had the foresight to essentially purchase the brands so that they wouldn't get lost. And Joe, took he used this sale of assets essentially to say, I'm selling it as a loss, so to lower his tax burden, if you want to get into the weeds.
Hmm.
And so New York bought up all these sites. They revived Gothamist, and they offered to various entities in LA and also in San Francisco and in DC to essentially purchase the LAist brand name, or in the case of WAMU in DC, to purchase the DCS brand name. So we had an opportunity to buy LAist, and this was a big deal because KPCC, the call letters of our public radio station, actually Pasadena City College owned those call letters. So we didn't really own our brand. So LAist was an opportunity to own our brand, and it was one of the best purchases that we ever made from a marketing perspective.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so
So
interesting.
that's the
And
little story of how little media brands and big media brands change hands. But I know that some people in LA have mixed feelings about KPCC versus LAist.
mhm.
But again, it's important for a local news outlet to own their brand. LAist is a descriptive brand, the name of the city is in the name.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I think I'm really proud of the work that the newsroom has done recently during the fires,
Hmm.
and just the public service that they provide.
Yeah, I saw something about that on social about the importance of local news for emergency situations. When I was in Maui during the fires, I was working with a local radio station, and it was really key to kind of check in on all the clients that might have lost their businesses. But in the moments that a fire happens, I just know from I mean, I lived in California for a while, but in Maui in particular, there's really only one road in and one road out in a lot of the places you're going. Same could probably be said about Topanga and other places that were affected by these fires. But social's not going to be able to keep up with that real time need that people have. If is the road I'm on going towards a hellfire situation, or do I turn around or what?
Exactly. Yes.
Um,
There is a
so
role for real-time broadcast for sure in an emergency situation. And, tying back to psychology, I think there's also something to be said about a big conversation, a live conversation that the people in LA can tune into and feel like they're hearing the city reflected back to them. So yeah, hugely huge fan of LAist, even though I'm no longer there. And, at the end of my time at LAist, essentially, what happened was during my time at KPCC and LAist, I got sucked into the local news universe. And that was great because it's interesting and necessary in a service that I believe in. But my first love was always audio. So when the opportunity came up to work with folks at American Public Media and essentially sort of reconstitute and rebrand the podcasting branch as APM Studios, I jumped at that because my interest in audio includes news and local news, but it's also broader than that. And that was, then I had the opportunity to work on distributing the radio show Marketplace. I worked on The Slowdown, a daily poetry show. I worked on kids shows, Brains On, which is a STEM show, Forever Ago, which is a history show, Smash Boom Best, which is actually teaching kids debate skills, even though it sounds just like a silly comedy show. And, Ripple, which was recently named one of the best podcasts. It was about the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, or maybe we have to say Gulf of America. I hope not. So, so, I had all of a sudden, this breadth of experience touching all of these big, impactful shows. And, to be even more specific about this, I was on the business side and I saw how these deals get made. And I learned about working, with, some of the agents in town. And I read more contracts than I have ever seen in my entire life. And so it was a great education. I learned so much. I really did.
Sounds like my experience also at TuneIn, kind of taking on this managerial role and then having to do contracts for all these professional athletes and everything. And it's like, I'm not a lawyer, but I try my best to get these things right.
You learn a lot. You learn a lot from reading this stuff, and you learn a lot about the larger ecosystem of podcasting.
Yeah. Well, that experience was, perfect for what our needs were and have been. And then, I was so grateful, as I already said, to Tracy for putting us in touch. But I think the biggest star power, or the thing that got me most excited from your experience outside of the psychology degree was with Marketplace. I mean, what show is there in the world that can make the subject matter of what they discuss as fun as they make it?
Absolutely. Yeah, and they were groundbreaking, when they started, and they have maintained this incredible level of quality and this incredible level of access to, the people who report in the news, but also the people who make the news. So yeah, Marketplace is really the crown jewel, I would say, in the American public media portfolio. And I was so fortunate to work on that show and to try to grow it and to also try to grow the revenue for that show.
Yeah, Kai Rizdal, right? I mean, this guy, he sounds so laid back in his delivery. And I remember he had like Ben Gibbard from Death Cab for Cutie on. I'm like, this is an economics show?
Yeah.
I loved it. It made me happy. I mean, it kept
Yes.
me coming back for more.
This is the United States, and Marketplace essentially looks at the news through the lens of money. And I have to say, it's a good perspective for the U.S. because money is the society is runs on money. Can I say that? There is it's just a
Yes.
big force in society. And so a show like Marketplace really oftentimes cuts to the core.
Yeah. As much as I may lean socialist, my I'm very much a capitalist, and I'm American, and this is this company. We're a for-profit company. We thought about being a not for profit or nonprofit, and it seemed like even more challenging than what we're doing. So
Yes, yes, it is. It is. I mean, it's not easy to make money in podcasting. Can we just say that on the show? I think the people who were the
sure.
guests who were on the show would agree. And it's also that the ground is shifting as we speak. You brought up video earlier. Um, I think that there's just an enormous amount of change and movement, and the New York Times bought Serial, and Amazon ultimately bought Wondery. So there is consolidation going on, and the
Yeah.
business model is always evolving.
Spotify has announced a major push towards video to better compete with YouTube. We were actually on a call, what was it, yesterday, where you were talking about putting more eggs in the YouTube basket. And I wholeheartedly agree with you just from recent limited experience. I think Spotify might get there eventually, but YouTube has all the pipes in place to kind of they're incentivizing shorts. They're kind of, I wouldn't say they're becoming social media. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you have to realize that Spotify is still an audio platform. You can look at YouTube as a video platform, but to be a bit provocative, I would say YouTube is actually a search engine. And so if you think about the fact that sort of the big problem when it comes to audio is discoverability, it's just that audio doesn't lend itself to the same way to discoverability than visuals. Audio is a linear medium, so we can only listen to one thing at a time. But I
Right.
can look at a search results page in YouTube and just visually, I can scan much, much more information, and I can hone in on clips or thumbnails that are perhaps more applicable to me. So, in short, YouTube is a search engine. TikTok, if it sticks around, it's not a video platform, it's a search engine. And
Mm.
so, even though, as we commented on earlier, I'm old and I'm still a reader, like I gravitate towards text. I still search in I have I have now graduated from Google to ChatGPT, but I'm still much more a text-based searcher.
Hmm.
But I think the people who listen to the people who are on TikTok, people are on YouTube all the time, they just treat it as their primary search engine. So if you want to be in front of those audiences, then you have to have a visual offering. It's simple as that. It all comes back to what are the audience habits? Who do you want to reach? And where do they hang out? And what are their habits for finding information? And they're not going to painstakingly look for your show title on Spotify, because you know that that's sometimes difficult, right? Even if you know the show title, even if you know what you're looking for, it's sometimes a little bit hard to find. They're going to search on YouTube, they're going to search on TikTok. And so having a presence there is going to be essential, at least for those who are looking for sizable mass reach.
That's great. No, I appreciate your thoughts on that. And I know we talk about this in our private meetings all the time. So it's kind of nice to be able to chat with folks listening. And maybe they'll have their own thoughts and want to put in the comments or on social or what have you. But you brought up ChatGPT. While you are our head of psychology, you're also our chief AI person. I don't know what to call you. How many titles can I give you in one interview?
I just, I always feel a little funny about this, but I think most people we're all busy, right?
Yeah.
So ChatGPT is just a way to, get to a first draft sooner. And it's always just a first draft.
Love that.
And I'm just always trying to get to a first draft of a proposal, a first draft of an email faster. And so, yes, I would say I'm a power user of ChatGPT. I just treat ChatGPT as a a very obedient employee, and that's how I get. I would be really surprised if the people listening, who are all, I think, have an entrepreneurial streak, if they haven't discovered that ChatGPT can be, and others. ChatGPT is just my platform of choice, but all the other AI tools, it's just a way to get from the blank page that's staring at you and you're trying to write an email, or you're trying to write a proposal, or you're trying to, create something for a client. It's just a way to get from the blank page to a first draft sooner. And then, of course, you refine it and you rewrite it in your own words. But it's a great time saver. On another show, the conversation has to be had about how we're going to feed the enormous amount of energy that AI will demand of us in the future, and how we
Yeah.
do that where we're already strapped for environmentally friendly energy sources to begin with, but we're not going to solve that problem here. But I'm aware that ChatGPT is almost underpriced right now, because the people who make ChatGPT, they want all of us to get hooked and dependent on that technology, and it's working.
It is working. And I'll say just the most recent experience of working on our series, Reimagining Us, I've never seen AI used with such regularity to the benefit of the production team and the talent, and summarizing comments from a number of different interviews and a whole episode to create our descriptions. I used to think this stuff was like dirty words to say out loud, that we weren't using our brain power to do everything from tip to tail on the production. But now, things have changed, and the robots are helping. So
The robots are helping until the day when they take over. Yes, but right now they're still helping us.
yes, I love the bright future, that optimistic outlook, the picture that you paint. Meanwhile, all I do is watch dystopian shows like Silo,
Exactly.
which are very negative and scary about the future.
Yes, indeed. Or Severance, which is just bombarding me with ads. Oof. I'm like, I'm already watching it. Stop with the ads.
The one thing I'll say, on the marketing side, the marketing campaign that had the actors in cubicles in the middle of, what was it, Grand Central Station or something in Manhattan, I thought that was very clever.
Yeah.
But I do have to have my close friends explain to me why I should continue to watch a show that's so depressing. But yeah, marketed very heavily.
Yes, Apple is leaning into the dystopian sci-fi all the way.
They are, and I'm here for it. So last question before I ask the question I ask everybody, is about the future of podcasts and where you see Next Chapter, our company, fitting in. I feel like you, me, Michael, we're all pretty aligned in terms of what we want to do. It's not necessarily world domination, but kind of supporting our better angels, as some say, to try and amplify the mission oriented organizations that are looking to make the world a better place. But maybe there's more nuance in the way that you would explain kind of what you see as our strengths and the future of where you would take this company with us together.
Okay, so I will do my best. It's a big question. I will do my best to get my thoughts across. Here's what I would say. I think that it's very difficult to build a business model based solely on advertising revenue. And I'm very happy that Next Chapter is not betting solely on advertising revenue. I think there's actually very few companies that can get away with solely betting on advertising revenue in this day of age. I think there was sort of a podcast bubble when the ad rates or CPM rates were very high, and the shows that had an enormous amount of audience were really, appealing to the masses, could flourish just based on ad revenue alone. And I think what we're seeing as a whole is that companies, have a much more diversified revenue model. So I'll give you an example, and I'll come back to Next Chapter. Even if you think of, the kind of shows that Serial makes, which are these very, highly produced, really kind of the top quality, limited series, the kind of shows that I like to listen to when I'm commuting, to the West Side, because they're so engrossing. Um, even those shows, yes, they sell some ads on those shows, but ultimately these shows are now a crown jewel in the New York Times portfolio. And recently, they actually started paywalling some of the episodes in those shows. They used to kind of give all the podcasts, the daily, etc., give it away for free and just heavily promote, subscribe to the Times for the journalism. But now they've actually are taking some of these episodes, putting it behind the paywall. So the podcast, in a way, if that show is very expensive to produce, one could say that it's almost a loss leader because it's such great journalism. It's so addictive to listen to that it brings people in, and it's going to become one of the factors that drive whether somebody subscribes to the New York Times. So the real business model is digital subscription in that case. If you look at Wondery and Amazon, similarly, if Wondery makes a show where they acquire some really great IP, well, at that point it's in the Amazon house, right? So it's at least conceivable that maybe some of that IP that gets produced as a podcast on Wondery, maybe at some point in the future, ends up as a show on Amazon streaming. And I think we've seen, some examples of that. So what I like about Next Chapter is it's not entirely dependent on ads. And so when we approach nonprofits about doing a podcast, it's really about understanding what is the larger business model of that nonprofit and how can we plug into that business model and enhance it. And so the podcast becomes a strategic communication tool, but it also could be a strategic fundraising tool. So, people who donate, write big checks to nonprofits, they like it when the nonprofit that they financially support makes big waves, really moves the needle. And so if we can help those nonprofits create a show that really gets the message out there, not necessarily to the biggest broad audience, but to a very specific audience, that is invested in the causes that nonprofit stands for, then I think we have done a service to that nonprofit. And I think that nonprofit is basically spending their marketing dollars in the best way possible. So I really believe in that, which makes it really easy to pitch.
Yeah.
So yeah. So does that yeah. So I think where it's going is essentially providing a service to people at all levels, whether they have a huge budget or whether they have a smaller budget. And that's also why I love our new foray into, creating services that maybe a nonprofit with a more limited budget, they can engage with Next Chapter, and they can perhaps pick up some pointers, and maybe they do some of the heavy lifting themselves in terms of production, but we can then help them with the distribution, we can help them with the marketing. I think, even though you emphasized earlier that Next Chapter is a for-profit company, it's just a really useful service. And I think that it's going to be really useful if we figure out a way to make that service accessible to as many nonprofits as possible.
Well put. Yeah. I'm excited about this new educational initiative. So, more to come on that. And maybe we'll have you back on the show to talk about
Yeah.
it at a certain point. But
Yes.
I think listeners of this show can expect more messaging around that we want to offer those looking for tips on how to kind of make podcasts on their own with some limited guidance and talking about doing office hours maybe once a month or something like that, so people can ask their questions and we can support people who see the work that we do, the podcast series that we produce, and maybe don't have as big of a budget as some of these organizations, our clients. But yeah, we want to help them as well. I think just bridging that gap is something we're hoping to do with this new education initiative, which I'm excited about in 2025. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And maybe what we should also perhaps add, and also something that I believe in, is podcasting, when I first got involved, was a bit of a niche media. And when I told people, hey, I work in podcasting, I make podcasts, what is that? And maybe they would have the podcast app on their iPhone, but they've never used it before. And, even though that has changed dramatically, and, there are tons of Americans that are now listening to podcasts, I think that podcasts are still not quite, haven't quite reached broad mainstream status. There's still plenty of people that I meet that say, no, I actually have never listened to a podcast. But I do think that, at the end of the day, what a podcast is, it's just a conversation that hopefully illuminates something or moves a cause forward. So, my prediction is that while 15, 20 years ago, all these organizations built their first website, including KPCC, now we're full circle. I think that now we're at a point where many of these organizations, there's no reason why they shouldn't have a podcast, because it's just a conversation. It's a conversation that organization hosts, whether it's a nonprofit or a museum or a for-profit. And so if we can be the conduit that makes it easier for people to participate in culture that way, then I think we've won and they've won.
Yeah. And the last note on this, I was going to bring up, and we don't have to go too deep into it, but we're going to be at the AAM Museum Conference in LA this May. Excited about it, to do like a live podcast taping. Excited to kind of introduce the museum world to podcasting, as it seems like there's a couple, the Smithsonian, some folks, National Science Foundation, are doing some podcasts, but there's many museums that don't have podcasts yet. So that's one of our initiatives, is to bring that to the world, since we've seen such positive success. The story of our Levine Museum of the New South in Charlotte, North Carolina, our podcast, Our New South, which has been winning awards. And, so I'm excited to offer that to more museums and let people know about it. So that's another initiative.
It's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. We're going to introduce a bunch of museums to the dark arts of podcasting, right? And I hear museum people like to have fun also in the post-conference sessions. So it'll be a blast.
Looking forward to it. Looking forward to you hosting us in LA.
Of course. Yes, indeed.
So my last question, I ask this of every guest: what's your next chapter, Alex?
Oh my God, I should have prepared for this.
Uh-oh.
What is my next chapter? I mean, for 2025, I'm just trying to achieve balance. There's another book that I have by my desk, but I don't have it on this desk. It's called The Portfolio Life, which I highly recommend to people. You can also, by the way, find it on Spotify as a free audiobook listen. So my goal, so the idea about the portfolio life is that it's not just work-life balance, which is a little simplistic, but you want your life to be a reflection of all the things that you want to do, whether it's, there's making money, but there's also exercise, there's spending time with family, there is giving back to the community. And I'm really trying to get all of these things to work together. And as I said, it's not as simplistic as, oh, when I'm on vacation, I will completely disconnect, which sometimes isn't practical. But maybe when I'm on vacation, I make a decision that I answer my emails between whatever 7 and 8 in the morning. So then I can spend the bulk of my day with my kids. And that's a reflection of having a portfolio life where the various pieces actually work together well. Um, and so that's my goal for 2025. Is that good enough?
That's plenty. No, that's great. It reminds me, I'm sure it's a better version of like the gig economy or something like that, right?
Yeah.
A portfolio. I'm sure it's not exactly that, but that's really cool. No, thanks for sharing. And the last note I'll add is that I think you and I perhaps both suffer from kind of the guilty feeling of not always serving those that we're working with, and like being available at all times. It's such a hard thing, at least in my life, to have boundaries and to stick to them, and to not give up all the energy for all the different clients. Because if I didn't delegate at all, or at least say I'm not available at this time, then I'd go crazy, because I've already burnt out in radio before. So
Yes, I know. And I see the hours that you work. And, right now I'm in LA and you're in London, and some of the meetings that you agree to, I'm like, shouldn't he be in bed by then? And my maternal streak is coming out.
oh, that's funny.
So yes, but I will also say there is no right or wrong answer. But, reading a book like The Portfolio Life or listening to a podcast, you just have to create an answer that's right for you. And you just have to monitor how you feel. And if you feel horrible answering work emails or work slacks on, a weekend getaway, then you probably shouldn't be doing it.
Fair.
In my case, I'm in a really lucky position right now because I like all the people that I'm working with, and I really don't mind getting a text. And I personally blur a little bit, the boundary between professional and friendship. And so that works for me. And it hasn't always worked perfectly in my life, but it really works well right now. So all you have to do, I think, as a professional is figure out what feels right for you and then make decisions accordingly. That's what I would, those are my words of wisdom.
I love it. I think this applies to all, not just a podcasting conversation or a media conversation. This applies to all. For healthy habits, mental health is super important.
Yes.
And I mean, what I am reminded of is like, if you burn out, that actually doesn't help the company, it hurts the company. So
Indeed.
it's better that we take some time for ourselves. But
Indeed.
Wrapping up here, thank you so much, Alex, for joining me. I know this is going to be the first of many conversations publicly, but I enjoy our private conversations and strategizing how to build this business and grow what we're doing. So
I'm having a total blast. So thank you, JT, and thank you for asking me to be on the show. And thank you for allowing me to share some of my peculiar childhood stories about audio. But yeah, it was fun. So thanks a lot.
Wonderful. Thank you for listening to this episode of Your Next Chapter. I'm your host, JT. Jeremiah Tittle. Our executive producer is Nick Kastner. This is edited by Justin Cortese, and we drop episodes bi-weekly. Please follow the show, and thank you so much for listening.